3, 2. And I blew the intro again. Hello, everyone. This is Brenton Lengel with Insurrection with Brenton Lengel, carried formerly on the Starcom radio network, now carried on YouTube because schedules are hard and I like people to see my face. And I am joined here by Naama Cates, journalist, actress. Naama, do you want to introduce yourself to the audience just in case some folks haven't heard of you?
Sure. So yeah, I'm Naama Cates. I was an actress in a previous life. I haven't done that in quite a while, but I did work in sort of film production, directing, writing, and audio. Currently, for the last couple of years, I produce and host a podcast called Incel, and was recently on Modern Day Debates, talking about the Blackpill.
Yeah, and this is actually really awesome because this is an overlap between my interests and also my wife's. Because I am super into debate, especially online debate. I am sort of an ascended reply guy. Like I argued with anarcho-capitalists so long I fought the final boss. And I do a lot on modern day debate. My wife is super into like true crime podcasts, which you've got a lot of experience in. And we've just started, I just recently subscribed to your Incel podcast. So yeah, really excited to see this is maybe like the one show of mine my wife might actually watch.
Oh, well, very cool.
Yeah. Also interesting that you started out as an actress. I started out as an actor in New York and then transitioned into writing and journalism. So you now consider yourself more of a journalist and you've moved away from the directing and acting end of your creativity, at least for the time being?
Well, I moved away from the acting probably permanently, but
as a former actor, yes, good job.
Yes, that was a while ago. I'd say I'm a podcaster now. I'm still a filmmaker, and I likely will go on to work in film, maybe documentary or something like that, possibly even on this topic. I don't know, but for the time being, I'm a podcaster, but will always be a filmmaker.
That's awesome. Yeah. And coincidentally, by the way, I'm a screenwriter, among other things. Yeah. So anyway, but I'm not going to talk about my projects here because this is not a weird bar in LA. When I saw you were appearing on Modern Day Debate, I was like this, and I looked you up, and I was like, "Oh, this is a real journalist." Oh no, what's she in for? Modern Day Debate, I love it. I love James. I think he does some great work. But
it's great.
Yeah, and there's been some incredible debates on Modern Day Debate, and I actually would rate yours up there, but not for the same traditional debate stuff. Like I really expected going into this when I saw you were debating an incel on the Blackpill, I was just like, oh no. Because as I said to you, over Twitter, a lot of Modern Day Debate's audience is inherently like they're very reactionary. They're mostly young Earth creationists, flat earthers, and new atheists.
It's a very interesting mix.
Yeah. And so like we've been introducing more lefties. Myself, Ben Burgess is really big. American Johnson of the Non-Compete podcast. I don't know if you're familiar with him. Vosh and Destiny, a number of kind of Jangle's a science lad who obliterated Milo Yiannopoulos when he was trying to make his comeback on there.
I am familiar with that one, yeah.
Okay, great. Fun fact, by the way, that was almost me against Milo, but I didn't like the topic. Yeah.
Fun.
I would have really liked it, but Jangles just did it perfectly, so I'm really happy that he was the one to really go in there and take him down. So we have a growing presence of lefty people, but I really expected when I was first starting to do like online debate, I remember this guy, he put me in there with this wasn't James, but this guy put me in there with he put me in with a neo-Nazi. I forget what the third one was, like a monarchist and a MGTOW, like a red pill. Yeah. Yeah, and out of the three of them, the MGTOW was the single most hateful person I think I've ever talked to. And again, I've debated neo-Nazis.
Right.
Yeah. So I was very surprised that the incel that you were put up against seemed to not be a chud. Like, what was that like for you?
Well, I I think, as I told you going into it, I saw what his handle was going to be, and I was expecting something very different as well. And I was almost prepared to walk away from it if that remained his handle, because it just seemed like a troll, or like it would have just been very disrespectful.
Mm-hmm.
Then, when he started talking and introducing himself, I did get the impression right away that this was not going to be a contentious debate, and also that he was more of a leftist. And I almost felt like I was the one defending the black pill a little bit more, if anything. So that was a
Yeah,
bit
I noticed that.
surprising. In my show, and one of the reasons I was sort of hesitant to do it to begin with is one of the reasons that I think my show works and has been able to continue and to get incels coming on all the time is that I don't debate. I really
Mm-hmm.
don't do that. I don't have people on in order to refute them or shoot down their arguments. That's really not the point of it. I just want to learn more about them. And I also have come to see legitimacy in some of their grievances. So, I didn't want to be positioning myself against an incel or, arguing in favor of the black pill. So I was glad that it was neither of those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely. I was very surprised because it almost sort of became because Popey, as he pronounced it, which, by the way, dude, don't put two O's in there if that's how you want to pronounce
Right,
it.
exactly.
Because I was ribbing him like at the beginning of the debate. I saw it and I popped into the comments to be like, pro tip: if you're looking to get laid, don't start your name with Poopy. Like, just don't do that.
Yeah.
And yeah, and he even kind of mentioned it in his opening. And I was like, oh, now I'm a jerk, because he, oddly enough, he had fairly decent politics. I thought he had a decent grasp of things. He just seemed a little, socially awkward, which all of us are to a certain extent.
Yes. Right. And which would, probably explain some of his difficulties in forming romantic or social, relationships. But one thing that I think one of my listeners pointed out that I sort of agree with is that he he talked about wanting to kind of reclaim the word, which I can appreciate. And I've had others on my show certainly kind of talk about that. And that's been something that I've, kind of wanted to do in a way as well, not to reclaim the word, but just to give people a different understanding of it. Um, but one of my listeners pointed out that at the beginning he started out by trying to very much distance himself from other incels, and they felt it was a little condescending, like, oh yeah, I'm not like those yuckies. And I thought that was kind of valid. I could understand why some of them might have felt that way.
Yeah. Now you've interviewed a lot of incels, and you've been following them for some time, and I think maybe one of the reasons why they're comfortable coming on your program, and also is like they're not monsters to you. They're people with
Yes.
actual problems and valid narratives to a certain extent, as much as that kind of thing can be valid. Um, and you talked a lot. It was very interesting to hear you talk about stuff like what was it, like lookism, or
Yes, lookism is one of the big topics that I explained, kind of the idea that people discriminate based on appearance, which I think is pretty much intuitive and very, when people dismiss that as being untrue, I find that very disingenuous. So that was one. There were other terms like hypergamy. I think that was one that came up a lot.
yes, hypergamy, which for the uninitiated, and I think my audience is pretty well initiated, but this is the idea that women instinctively look to mate up within the social hierarchy, that you're always
Yes,
looking for the most high status man to jump into bed with, which,
precisely. Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
And I mean, I'm sorry, say what you're going to say.
oh, well, just that the term is used a lot in the incelosphere and the broader manosphere, but it did not originate there. It's a sociology term. It's been around for over 100 years. I think one of its first usages was in the caste system in India.
Mhm. Yeah, well, it makes a lot of sense. And, to a certain extent, everybody's looking to not necessarily, I guess, nobody or very few people go into dating like with the idea that I'm going to jump up the social hierarchy with this, but they might be like, hey, I think this person is attractive and I'm drawn to them and they're so accomplished, therefore I think it would be awesome to get into a relationship with them.
Absolutely. I mean, who wouldn't want to, I guess, aim high?
Yeah,
One of the
shoot
reasons
for
that,
the moon, land in the stars.
yes, exactly. And I think that there are many arguments for why this is, hypergamy and what's more kind of common to women. But I think one of the most obvious and sensible is just that for a very long time in our history, up until fairly recently, in the grand scheme of things, 100 years ago in some places and a lot less than that in others, and arguably in most, women didn't have agency. They didn't have their own wealth, their own ability to be upwardly socially mobile. So their only way to sort of ensure that, and in that respect, the well-being and the comfort and security of their offspring would have been through marriage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you even kind of, I remember when I was in college, in the early 2000s, there was the term that we'd say, oh, that girl's going to college to get her MRS degree, which is the implication, the
Yeah.
fairly misogynistic implication, I should add,
Yeah.
that a woman is there in college to find a high status husband.
Yes, but that was, in 1950s and 60s when women were first being admitted to universities, that was often the case, and not necessarily because that was what they wanted, but it was what they were expected to do by their parents and whomever else.
Yeah, and what was great about the incel that you debated was he kind of recognized that this was the perfectly logical thing to do, and it wasn't necessarily sinister. Um, full disclosure, I'm a left classical anarchist, most interested in like the Catalan Spanish tradition, anarcho-communism,
Interesting.
anarcho-syndicalism.
That
Yeah,
was a very interesting little period in history.
it's fascinating. That's actually what my most recent screenplay that got optioned was. It's about the life of Buenaventura Durruti, who is basically the
Oh,
anarchist
very
Che
cool.
Guevara. Yeah, I'm really excited. There's a comic book coming out and a bunch of other stuff, but the issue is that, and the reason why I'm coming to the anarchism issue of it is that we do live in a very structured hierarchical society, not as structured and hierarchical as it was in the Middle Ages or even 50 years ago, but still, we live in a system that seems to incentivize very few winners and lots of losers, so to speak. And so when people are judged on their what they can bring to the economic merits or to their looks or whatever, there's a lot of people, if we continue to play that game, who are going to wind up isolated and miserable. And the
And
question
left out,
kind of
yeah.
is, yeah. So what do we do with them? And so my
Right.
question is, you've been talking to these incels for a while. Like, in your opinion, what's the way forward with this, generation of people who have deep difficulty finding intimacy from a partner?
Well, I think that there are many cultural issues that kind of come into play, and I talked about that at length in the debate. I think that the technology has evolved sort of faster than we have, and the way that we connect and engage with each other has changed a lot as a result. So I think that's one of the sort of contributing factors for a lot of incels currently, these young men. But I think sort of a bigger problem, I suppose, is indeed, what to do with people who don't fit into the sort of conventionally desirable traits of the age or the era. And that issue is kind of manifold, but I think with people who have social difficulties, a lot of them have a unique set of skills and talents that could actually be utilized very well nowadays. A lot of members of the incel community are on the autism spectrum, which is an example I give a lot. And of course, that doesn't cover all of them, but it is a staggeringly high proportion compared to that of the general population, which is, something like 20% or even close to 25% of, the form that I deal with a lot, which conduct sort of internal polls often, have formal diagnoses of being on the spectrum. So that's a very high amount, compared to the 1 or 2% of the general population. And those are people that have a lot of difficulties socially for many reasons, but they have sort of hyper focus and kind of unique interests, and they're very good with things that I could see being very useful now, like data analysis and, all these interests that would be very applicable in a sort of technocratic society too. So, people that have weaknesses in one area often have strengths in another. And that's one thing. And then the other is there are also people that may not have standout strengths in certain areas, and we kind of need to find a way to integrate them into society too. In our, meritocratic society that we live in now, there isn't really a lot of care or concern or community for people who don't really fit into those,
people whose value cannot be demonstrated or monetized by capitalists, I think.
Yes, exactly.
Now, this is really interesting. So when I was in college, I'm kind of telling on myself here, but there was a period that I kind of worried that I might wind up alone. And there was sometimes that I was very, I guess, frustrated in dating. Now, part of it was I was in a very conservative area with a very conservative college, and things changed when I, started working as a professional actor and hanging around with a bunch of goths. The dating dynamic changed in a major way. But I remember there was a period like sophomore year of college where I almost got sucked into like the proto red pill. There was like this sort of, I think instead of chicklet, people call it like dicklet, but it was like almost, I don't know if it was Tucker Max, but it was like there was a book.
Yes, fratire. I've always heard it referred to as fratire.
Fratire. Oh, that's very classy. I'm going to call it that from now on. But yeah, there was this book that my roommate at the time had given me, which was like the Complete and Total Asshole's Guide to Handling Chicks. And my roommate had sold this as, I started following the advice in this book and it worked. And then I stopped following the advice and it didn't work so well. So here, you can have this book and try to follow it. And so I remembered like reading the book, and you got to keep in mind, like, this is coming from a guy. I've always considered myself a feminist to a certain extent, like whether it was, even though I got inevitably raised with certain reactionary ideas, as a young red-blooded American male. But, I had a strong presence from my mother, my grandmother. You mentioned when women first started going to college in the 1950s, like she was one of the first women to go to college. Like when she went to college, it was women didn't go to college. They stayed and worked in the frickin' cotton mill because they were immigrants. So I wasn't exactly ripe for this kind of recruitment, but I remembered I followed the advice, and it was terrible advice. And thank God I stopped listening to the book. And also thank God that happened before you really had these sort of online bubbles with PUAs and MGTOWs, and then the crossover from them to straighten out fascism and neo-Nazism that you see. So where for you is the line between men genuinely being just frustrated with dating prospects and when it starts to become something a little bit darker? And what should men who were maybe in my situation, right now, what are like the warning signs that they should look for that they may be getting sucked into something that is, at ultimately a death cult, in my opinion? But what should they be looking for?
Um, I don't know if I would characterize it as a death cult. I think that for some people, for most people,
Mhm.
they find this community. And yes, indeed, in this age when all of this stuff is available, it's just, we live in a very, very crazy and difficult time to navigate, especially for young people. Um, but I would say for most people, they find this community when they are experiencing these frustrations. And for some of them, they they find a camaraderie there and sort of a friend group and also a place to vent and to talk about things that they don't talk about out of shame in most places without feeling shame and without feeling judged. And they can make little friendships there, and some of them even sort of find their footing as they're doing it, and they kind of just pass through it, you know. With some of them, it even helps them feel less alone. Some of them even kind of find a voice, or they become content creators or propagandists or whatever you want to call it. But it really does sort of lift their self-esteem. And
They
if they,
express their emotions in a way that
yes,
society has told them not to,
yes,
and they are validated for having those emotions.
yes, where they cannot find that anywhere else.
Yeah.
And especially for the most sort of socially awkward and isolated, um, the fact that it's online and that it is done through these fora and typing,
Hmm. In kind of a
sometimes,
low stakes environment.
yes, low stakes for the high and hib, as they call themselves. And I think to a certain degree, too, even, there's an incredible, staggering amount of kind of ribbing and roasting and prodding at each other that they do in these communities. And I think a certain amount of that can even be healthy and can sort of develop a thicker skin.
Hmm.
But then, you know, it can certainly cross that point and lead people to feeling a lot more negative, to being, stuck really in an echo chamber where they are hearing nothing but these ideas, and to the point where they no longer even want to try and find their way, dating, or where they have such negative ideas now that even if they were presented with an opportunity to date or have a girlfriend or whatever the case may be, they wouldn't want it, or they, even if they tried, maybe they'd have such negative ideas that they'd be certain that they were going to be used and abused and cheated on, and that happens with a lot of them because
Hmm.
they develop these ideas. I would say that, I mean, really the bottom line is, if this is making you feel worse, if this is making you feel more depressed when you think about it, if you are beginning to only do this and lose interest in things that you had previously, and the relationships that you had, whether they're your family or your friends, become less meaningful and less enjoyable, basically if you start going down a downward spiral, then that's it. And it's very easy to say that, and it is very simple, and it's true. The difficulty is that it's hard for an individual to recognize for themselves,
Hmm.
because, like all sort of internet interactions, when you're getting, you know, uh, upvotes or positive reactions for the things you're saying, and the upvotes and positive reactions only come when you say increasingly more negative things, then that's not good, but it can feel good, and it can sort of lead to the dopaminergic responses in the brain that you get from getting likes and things on social media, all of that stuff. Um,
Yeah,
so
certainty is kind of a drug, and I will
yeah,
notice that people, if they have issues when they have rage or they say something that's very radical, you can get a shot of dopamine straight to the brain, and it will
yes,
feel good.
yes, absolutely. And you can get that from online interactions, and you can also get that from ideology, and from beliefs. They can have sort of an opiate effect. So for the person in the downward spiral themselves, it can be very hard to sort of step out, especially once they're in it. If they're at the point where they're questioning it, they're not in it yet. And so
Mhm.
if an individual finds themselves questioning, well, is this doing me harm? Am I possibly being radicalized? Am I just going down a rabbit hole? If you're questioning that, then you need to really evaluate that for yourself, and try to be objective and try to think about the things that matter to you and that have mattered to you all your life. Try to really differentiate the people in your life who have cared for you, such as family, such as close friends, and anyone else that might be in your circle that probably do want what's best for you, and try to kind of compare that and their motives with these strangers on the internet.
Mhm.
Um,
Now, on that note, by the way, I assume that you've seen this, but just in case you haven't, the ContraPoints video on incels. Are you familiar with that one?
yeah, uh-huh.
Now, she talked about in that video, she put up like a post that someone had essentially like they were excited about finding the incel community because she was like really excited about like just finding weird internet subcultures, but the actual experience of going in like day after day was having a very negative effect, and
Mm,
kind of implicating some suicidality and stuff. Like, do you
yeah.
think that was that is that a normal reaction that somebody would have to this, or is that an abnormal reaction that just got bolstered by the video?
I think that maybe to that extent might not be common, you know,
Hmm.
but I certainly hear about that. I hear about that also, just in researchers in the terrorism field when they're exposed to videos like this and content like this, and definitely women that kind of research misogynistic movements or male supremacist movements, that they experience that. Some have said that they have had to even move and kind of uproot their life. For me personally, I certainly wouldn't characterize my experience as being anything like that, but everybody is different and everyone has a different sort of innate resilience. So it's hard for me to speak for anyone else.
Hmm. Now, I should clarify also, by the way, when I called it a death cult, I didn't necessarily mean the incel portion of this, but I kind of see, and this goes down to a point of disagreement that you had with your opponent in the debate, was that you had said these people, are essentially not dangerous, and he had said they are. And what I have noticed, at least with regard, because I've spent a lot of time, once I got interested in anarchism, I immediately then started researching fascism.
Uh-huh.
And there's a huge crossover from misogyny to, out and out fascism and neo-Nazism. And you kind of almost see it in the obsession with social hierarchy, the thing that
Yeah,
most
well,
completely reject.
I've
Mhm.
thought a lot about that from early on, because there are many reasons for that. I mean, one is the two kind of subcultures that their newest forms with incels in the manosphere and with neo Nazis as they currently exist now, both kind of came up with 4chan and kind of started
Mhm.
with this 4chan culture that was about being subversive and was definitely men by and large, and being politically incorrect and things like that. So there is an overlap in terms of the way that they kind of started their evolution with the language. There's certainly a crossover that they kind of inform each other, and I think that there are other reasons for this too. One being that a misogynistic group or a group like incels that would look at their issues primarily as being with women, and oftentimes look at feminism as a contributor to that, um, would kind of have traditionalist leanings, anti-progressive, anti-feminist, anti-contemporary society, so that's what leads them to the traditionalism. Also, the autism spectrum disorder, that kind of personality, the very black and white thinking, the need for order, the rigidity, the kind of obsessions with ranking and things, is a personality type that just tends to be more conservative, less open to new experience, more um, conscientious, just certain traits that would lead it to be that. And so there is a little bit of an inherent thing. But then the other issue is really not so much that incels or these groups are necessarily a gateway to the alt-right, but that it's ripe ground for recruitment into more fringe ideologies, because that's always true with a group of people that has nothing to lose, don't feel they have a place in society, don't have a family, don't have a girlfriend or prospects for a family of their own in the future. These are the men that get recruited into all kinds of movements to kill in the name of something, to fight wars, etc.
To take that sort of frustration and channel it towards take the because fascists always tend to be masters of shadow projection and take the evils in themselves and project it outside onto an external foe, and then try to destroy it.
Yes.
So I guess sort of we're coming right up on the end, and you mentioned you only had a quick 30 minutes, so thank you for having this. I suppose my question to you, to relate back to the debate, what do you think was the moment where you felt like there was the most amount of connection between you and your opponent, you and your audience, and people in the audience who might be skeptical of your position, and where do you think that there was the most disconnect? So basically, highlight of the debate and low point of the debate.
I think that I felt a connection with my opponent fairly early on, and felt that we had a lot of common ground. There was one point where he described himself as wanting to reclaim the word, and not blaming women. When I said, well, that's because you're reasonable, and there are many incels like you. So I guess that could be a high point, that there were many points like that. I think at the very end was when we, expressed the most disagreement. And I know that after we hung up, he wanted to keep talking about the classification of incels as a hate group, and he had some gripes with me there, but we didn't get to have that conversation yet. So we'll see how that goes.
Absolutely. And for the record, you disagree that they should not be classified as a hate group, correct?
Yes, I understand why they would be. I just don't think it's helpful necessarily. My bigger issue is with classifying them as terrorists. I think that's completely wrong. Yeah.
Well, terrorism tends to be something that the government just throws on pretty much anything these days, unfortunately.
Yeah.
All right. Well, great. Well, we've been in here, and I don't want to take up too much of your time. So, you want to plug your pluggables really quickly? Where can people find you? Where can they find? I do have your podcast linked in the description.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I'm on Twitter. I don't really do too much other social media, but I am on Twitter. At Incel Project is the podcast Twitter, and at Naama Hates is my personal Twitter, and I kind of use them both very similarly. So, if you go to one, you'll find the other.
Absolutely. Awesome. So definitely check that out. One final closing question, because we got a comment here that that reminded me of this. So Be in the Hive says, my father owned a dojo. He was a Marine, a cop, an authoritarian conservative. He was constantly oppressing and trying to control us kids. And I think it helped mold me into the ANCOM, anarcho-communist, that I am today. I've had issues as well, and thinking back on like early childhood. And my question to you, I guess, is my wife has a pet theory that there are a lot more people suffering from PTSD, from like complex PTSD, than we actually realize, and that the popular parenting tactics that have been employed in the United States over the past several decades, if not the past 100 years, have left a lot of people injured and like socially stunted. And my question is, have you noticed this in your research on the incels, or do you think it's more of a factor of technology today?
Oh, I think that's true without question. But I don't think that only applies to incels. That applies to just so many adults walking around today. It's complex PTSD, sort of developmental traumas that so many people experience for so many reasons. Also, generational traumas and intergenerational traumas that we inherit from our parents, and think of how many people's parents have survived atrocities like wars and what they kind of carry with them unresolved and then pass on to their kids. So yeah, that's a beast.
Excellent. Well, it's good to hear. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. That is journalist Naama Cates. Please check her out on the Incel Project podcast, which is linked in the description. I'm going to be rating it 5 stars and listening to it. And thank you so much for coming on MDD. And yeah, I'm actually really, really happy that you wound up doing the debate, because it wound up not quite being the tire fire that I thought it was going to be at first.
Yeah, well, same with me. And
Okay.
It's been great talking with you too. So.
All right. Well, I hope to see a lot of you. And if you do want to debate again on Modern Day Debate, let me know, because I'd love to do this again. All right. I will talk to you later. Okay.
Okay. Take care.
All right.